Previously on the Great College Bake Off, Bread Edition, Part 1. I'm not that talented at baking. I've never used yeast before. Very hot water. We're gonna go with pretty hot water. We're gonna add 1 spoon for good luck. After removing from the oven, lift the bread out of the pan, place it on a rack. We don't have a rack. So I think it's time to pull the bread out, and honestly, it's looking a lot better than I thought. Look at it. Now, welcome to the Great College Bake Off, Bread Edition, Part 2, starring Sam.
Hello! My name's Sam. I am going to be cooking beer bread today, which is going to be a little bit different than Bella's because mine doesn't need to proof, so it'll be a pretty quick process. Alright, so I'm going to look at the recipe, and we first need 3 cups of flour. So that's going to be over here. For some beer breads, you use like self-rising flour, but for this one, we're just going to be using regular bread flour because buying an entire pack of flour for 1 loaf of bread doesn't make sense, you know? So we're doing 3 cups. I have washed my hands, by the way, so I'm using my hands to level off this stuff.
You can already tell this is very different from the first round.
We're doing things a little differently around here. Alright, so the flour is in, and for beer bread you want to mix all of the dry ingredients before you put in the wet because it doesn't have the yeast, which is going to make it airy. And so if the flour gets too much, the bread will be really thick, and we don't want that. So we're going to do that. Alright, so then we need to add some brown sugar. Now this recipe is pretty cool. I've been eating it for basically my entire life because I love beer bread, just as a whole. It's like a nice thick sandwich bread, and when you don't want to eat that much, it fills you up. It's like rice. Alright, so with the brown sugar, we want to make sure to pack it in because with brown sugar, it doesn't measure normal sugar. Like you can't just go into the thing and let it go because there will be like air bubbles of stuff that doesn't get full, and then you won't be doing a full 1/3 cup. So I want to make sure we pack that down. And then we're going to add in our salt and our baking powder. So for our baking powder, we're going to do 1 tablespoon. I know what a tablespoon and a teaspoon difference is. Guys, this is crazy.
Guys, what's the difference between a tablespoon and a teaspoon? I think this is a teaspoon. This is probably a teaspoon, right guys?
Yeah, what would happen if you mix those up?
What would happen if I mix those up? So if I mix them up, we're doing a teaspoon for the salt and a tablespoon for the baking powder. So if I mix those up, this would be really salty bread, and it wouldn't have the baking powder, which is pretty important because it makes things like rise and stuff, so the bread would not turn out very well. Alright, so we're gonna do 1 tablespoon. I just want to check, make sure, alright, because I just explained what would happen, but I don't actually want to make that happen. So we're gonna do the baking powder, like so. Boop. I'm gonna set that aside, and then we're gonna do the salt. And when you're doing salt, you never want to measure over the bowl, just because if you have like an oops, then all of the salt will be in the bowl and then none of your ingredients will work, and you'll have to pretty much start over from scratch, and that's a waste of flour. And as a college student, I am not ready to waste that much flour. Boop. So we're gonna level that off too, like so. So we have a teaspoon, and then we're gonna add that in. All right, so we have all of our dry ingredients mixed up. So I'm just gonna grab a fork and kind of emulsify that, because the problem with baking without yeast and not proofing is that if you touch the flour and it's wet, it will pretty much immediately just like be gluten and like gluten producing, and then it'll be really thick. So we want to mix everything up beforehand so I don't have to mix that much when I add in the wet ingredients, right? Like it's a lot better if we just don't have to do that. So we're mixing all of this up. And some of the brown sugar was a little bit granulated together. So I'm just kind of squishing that down into the flour a little bit. All right, so then what we're gonna wanna do is the recipe calls for 12 ounces of beer. And we don't have 12 ounces of beer, so I'm gonna use ginger ale. But I also don't have 12 ounces of ginger ale just in a can. I have two 7.5 ounce cans of ginger ale, which is lovely. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna melt the butter first, so then we can just get going on this. So this is 2 tablespoons of butter, and this does not go in the batter with the ginger ale. It actually goes over the bread, so then it helps it bake a little bit more. So I put that in for about 30 seconds, which will probably not be enough, but you know, we vibing. All right, so our butter is pretty much melted. That's kind of the consistency we're looking for. So it's pretty good. And now we're gonna add the ginger ale because it's what we need to do. Okay. Actually, I'm gonna pour the butter in another cup. We need another cup for that. All right, so we have this small bowl. I'm gonna pour the butter into this because I'm gonna need to measure out the ounces for the ginger ale that we're gonna add. So that should be fun. We're going to need about 4.5 ounces. And thank goodness this thing shows the ounces. And normally when you do this, you want it to be pretty accurate, just because, there we go. You're only supposed to add a certain amount of liquid to this. So we are gonna be doing this. Let me check the recipe to make sure. All right, so we're gonna add in that, and we're gonna add in that. And now this works the same as beer, because what makes beer bread is not the yeast of the beer, it's the carbonation. And so the carbonation is going to make sure that a second reaction happens in the oven, and the carbon dioxide will make this bread kind of come alive a little bit more. Because we have the baking powder, which will technically also create a more airy way to the bread, but without actual yeast, you need 2 reactions, which is where the carbon dioxide from the soda comes in. And I use ginger ale just because it has kind of around the same, not like flavor of beer, because obviously it doesn't taste like beer, but like flavor profile. Like it's not that sweet. It's like spicy Sprite. Spicy Sprite. Because it has that like kind of spice to it, you know? All right, so that should be good. And what we're doing is we're mixing it just until it is kind of all of the ingredients are moistened. So you don't want to mess with this flour a whole lot. So we're gonna take our bread pan and probably should grease it a little bit. All right, so I took a little butter and I'm just putting that on the bottom and kind of on the side. You don't need to grease it a whole lot because we're gonna be putting butter on top of it, which is gonna help it not stick as much. So we're going to place the bread into the bread pan. Just kind of tossing it in there. This does not need to look pretty. Beer bread is not meant to look pretty. Beer bread is meant to be bread. And you know, there's like all those sourdough creators, they make a lot of pretty bread. Beer bread's not one of those. It's going to be kind of weird looking, and it's exactly how we like it. So I'm just gonna press it down a little bit because I want the butter to get a firm coverage. I still have my hands washed, so don't worry about that. And beer bread's really sticky. So we have our beer bread in the pan, and that's nice. And then we're just going to pour our butter, kind of just coat it over the bread. Just like that. All right. And then that's gonna be our beer bread, and then you're gonna put it in the oven for about 45 minutes. Or until you see a crack kind of form down the middle, because that's gonna be when it's done. Beer bread's kind of hard to cook and know when it's done, but when that crack is down the middle and it looks pretty dry, you're pretty dang close to it being done. So we're gonna go in the oven. Very confident in this. The only thing that could go wrong at this point in time is if it's slightly undercooked in the center, but I've been stabbing with a knife repeatedly, and I don't think it's raw there anymore. All right, I think it's done. So we're gonna call that a win. Burrito. Look at that. Good. It's got some nice nice browning. Let's see if we can show. Let's see. Look at that. I'm gonna leave it in the pan for a little bit just so it can cook some more and keep it crispy. But then it will go pretty much on the counter because it's crispy bread. All right, we're done. We're done with the bread.
Well, this is it for the video. If you enjoyed watching Sam make her bread, make sure to leave a like down below and leave a comment on how you think she did. If you would like to continue watching this series, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you know when our next update is. See you guys soon. Bye!